It's time to introduce our first speaker. David Barker is Chief Executive of Crohn's and Colitis UK and has come along today to give us his ideas on what an excellent service for patients will look like over the next few years. David, thanks very much for coming, and over to you.
Thank you, Stuart, and thank you for the opportunity to both join you today but also help in shaping today's agenda. So here we go. Okay, so I've been asked just to talk about right at the top of the session to helpfully define what do we mean by excellence, both from a patient perspective but also from a clinical perspective as well. I started with this slide. It's a slide I use a lot. It's something that we have quite a simple vision within the patient charity about actually what do we want to achieve for patients, and that is, as it says on the slide there, a world-class level of service and treatment for any patient wherever they live in the UK. And if I put that in even more simple terms and personal terms, it's a level of service that I would want for my own wife, children, mum, dad, etc. So that's the starting point. None of us can argue with that. That's why we're all here today and do what we do. What I thought I'd do is just sort of go back to what does the NHS say, and this is this slide is a bit NHS England centric. Helen Terry will be speaking a little bit later about Scotland, but actually the three things there I thought were quite interesting, and the 5-year forward view, which I'm sure you're familiar with, I think is starting to gain traction. From my perspective, it's one of the few things that actually has come from the NHS that is starting to get a real positive sort of impact with media people and a range of other people. But they say three things: patient safety, clinical effectiveness and patient experience. In Scotland they talk more about person-centred care, as you're probably aware. But if we were to go back to actually look at what does the NHS say is excellence in the services that are being delivered for patients, then it's enshrined in those three things: safety, clinical effectiveness and patient experience or person-centred care. So that's the NHS view. I am, for those of you that know me, I'm passionate about the digital space, the opportunity that digital brings. And one of the things that we do quite frequently within the charity is do a crowdsourced a view, just to get a snapshot of what patients are feeling. Since I joined Crohn's and Colitis UK, we've grown our Facebook following to 110,000 people, very, very engaged, a good representation of patients, carers of patients. And I was laughing with Keith Bodger and Fraser this morning because crowdsourcing on Facebook was something that they weren't that familiar with. But from our point of view, it gives a really, really good snapshot. So a couple of weeks ago, we put up on our Facebook, if you ran the NHS and were responsible for achieving excellence in your local IBD service, what three things would you make your priority? And a whole raft of stuff, as I'm sure you can imagine, came back. What I tried to do was try to make some sense of that and cluster it into a number of key areas. And essentially, if you were to go through those, and there was hundreds of people that responded on it, this was the sort of four key areas that you could cluster them into. If a patient was to say, what is excellence in the service that I'm receiving? The first one was around specialist nurses. People, all the patients I speak to, I'm sure you speak to as well, they love their IBD specialist nurse if they are fortunate enough to have one. And a lot of people that responded to that question would say, we need more specialist nurses. The second one was about access to services, and that was two core areas really. One was about, if I'm having a flare-up, I don't want to have an appointment in 2 weeks, I want to talk to someone now. And again, that was linked into the specialist nurses, the helplines that people can phone up when they are in most need. So access to services, and also within that, quite a lot of people saying, when I come to my service, I want to see the same doctor. Now, you will know as clinicians better than I that is not always that practical. But access to services was the sort of next header in terms of excellence. The third one was a bit of a no-brainer. You know, I want access to the best possible treatments and to be given an opportunity to make sure that if I have one of these conditions, the access that I get to the treatments I receive is critical. And the fourth one, was around, interestingly, around prescription charges, which is obviously only applicable in England, but people felt quite passionately about if I am having to buy my medications, then that can be sometimes quite a challenge for the amount that I'm needing across the year. So that was what patients said. So we've had what the NHS said excellence is, what the patients say. Last February, you will be aware, and some of you in the room here will have been involved in working alongside us to influence and help shape the NICE clinical standard on inflammatory bowel disease. So that was 4 sort of key areas really that were pulled out, which I'm sure you're familiar with. One was about referral to specialist services within 4 weeks. One was about the importance of the MDT. One of the standards around surgery and making sure that people have access to specialist surgeons who is also a member of the MDT, and a 4th one about monitoring of drug treatment, sorry. So they're the 4 key things that NICE feel are important in terms of a quality standard for inflammatory bowel disease. So we've got the NHS, we've got the patients, and we've got what NICE believe. Then I am honoured to be able to chair the IBD standards, which I think have really been a landmark in terms of driving up the treatment and care of patients with IBD. And for me, the thing I think is most powerful about that is the partnership between all of those organisations that you can see in front of you. This is everyone who is involved with, cares about the treatment and care for people with inflammatory bowel disease, talking as one. And the IBD standards, I really do hail as the sort of almost Bible from a patient's perspective. You know, if you want to ensure that you are getting an excellent care and treatment, then have a look at the standards. And I think that they are, for me, a really good opportunity to say this is what the benchmark should be in terms of excellence across the whole of the United Kingdom. So, we've got a quick back to your iPhone poll question. And there's another one following this in a moment, but I think just be interesting to see from your perspective, and there might have been others that we could have added to this list, but which of the following do you believe has made the biggest difference in driving excellence in care over the last few years? Is it the standards? Is it the audit? Is it actually about developing your own quality improvement locally in your services where you're working? Is it about involving patients in the development of services? Is it about more IBD nurses? Or finally, is it about better use of technology in collecting data and some of the work that the registry, which we'll hear about later, is helping with some of those things? So 6 options. What do you think has made the biggest difference in driving excellence in care? See where that gets us. Some difficult decisions there, I think, because there may be a few. But if you're for... Oh, wow, look at that. Straight in on a lot of IBD nurses in the audience. Fascinating. Okay, so that's quite interesting. I mean, this IBD nurses obviously seems to be pretty much up there, which reflects certainly what the patients were saying as well. Okay, we'll move on from that then. So we're going to force you down a bit further on that then. If you only could use one tool to benchmark excellence or measure excellence in your IBD service, what would it be? So you're allowed one thing to actually measure how excellent your service is within your local area. What would it be? Would it be the IBD audit? You're probably using that at the moment. Would it be the standards? Actually, there's some good targets or benchmarks in here. Would it be the NICE quality standard? Or would it be regular collection of data in your local services? Again, the registry playing a big part in that, or actually none of the above. So if you were forced to say, I can only have one tool over the next year to measure how I'm doing in my local service, which would it be? Great, well, that's interesting and both encouraging, actually. I can see Stuart nodding his head here. So about, data drives, information is power, isn't it? And I think that begins to show how important people believe that the data and regular collection of clinical data and patient outcomes and satisfaction can be a real driver to help create excellence. Okay, I'm going to have one final plug before I finish. I mentioned the IBD standards, which I'm sure you will all be familiar with. As a patient charity, we have just been working over the last few months to deliver hot off the press a couple of weeks ago, something called My Crohn's and Colitis Care. You may have seen it already. I call it the patient version of the standards. The standards document, as you know, is a clinical document, and we have been working with the standards group and with all of those organisations again to create a document that patients can take away and actually talk to you as clinicians about how we're doing benchmarked against the IBD standards. And it was really interesting, I think, for me, in the early versions of this which were written, the clinicians, some of the feedback that came from clinicians was, hang on, this is a two-way street. This isn't just about the patients coming and demanding. This is about actually us working as a team, as a partnership, 50-50. You know, I want you to, if you need to turn up at your appointments, you need to take the medicines I prescribe you. So we got to a really good place, and some of the early feedback that we've received on that is Crohn's and colitis care. So this is a shameless plug for this. If you haven't seen it, it's on our stall in the main hall, and we're going to start putting that in patient packs that we send out as well. But we've had a really good feedback to that, and I think between those two, the IBD standards, which, as I said, I hail really is the sort of Bible, the patient version of that could be something that really helps us to drive excellence. Final poll, and then we shall move on. So, bearing in mind how passionate I said I was about the standards, and if there was one document I can hold up and say this is what is going to help us to achieve excellence over the next few years, what do you believe is going to really help us to make that those wonderful words that are in that document a reality? So is it going to be more consultants? Is it going to be more specialist nurses? Is it going to be about accrediting IBD services? And there is some discussion, as you're probably aware, within the BSG at the moment about accreditation across gastroenterology. So is it going to be that would help us to really deliver on the IBD standards? Is it going to be a redesign of your local service? Or is it going to be a miracle? Is it going to be an absolute miracle to deliver everything that is said in the IBD standards? Gosh, that's interesting as well. Miracle was up there to start with, accreditation, so that might be an interesting one for the BSG to take note of in terms of driving standards. I did just prepare a slide just in case miracle was overwhelming, to which my response would have been this, miracles can happen. If you shoot for the moon, you reach the stars, and while some of these things are very, very difficult, miracles can be delivered. So I had that one in just in case miracle was there. I think my few minutes is up, so I just wanted to leave you with that quote, which I found a while back, which I think for me really does sum it up actually. Excellence isn't something that happens overnight, it takes time. If you look at the achievements that have been delivered since the first IBD audit in 2006 and then the introduction of the standards in 2009, I do personally believe that there has been great progress in the world of IBD, and I think that in those darkest days when the world is against you and your patients are complaining and there's not enough money and there's not enough staff, please just do reflect on the journey that IBD has been on since 2006. We all know there is a huge amount still to do in terms of really delivering that excellence that we all believe, but from a patient's perspective, I would just like to use this last opportunity to just thank all of you for all you're doing. We're clearly speaking on behalf of patients, and I know if they were here today that and we have one of our patients actually who's going to be joining us a bit later, would be saying a thank you to you for all you're doing, and I'm confident that between us we will get to that excellence that we're all striving for. Thank you.